Welcome back. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Shortly after wrapping up his meeting with Ukrainian President Zelensky and European leaders at the White House, President Trump announced on Truth Social that he's arranging a meeting between Zelensky and Russian President Putin. Joining us now to discuss is Carla Sands, former U.S. ambassador to the Kingdom of Denmark. She's currently the chair of the Foreign Policy Initiative at America First Policy Institute. We also have with us former career diplomat and Energy Department official Bart Marcois. He's also a former presidential campaign advisor. Thank you both so much for joining us. Now, President Trump wrote, quote, "At the conclusion of the meetings, I called President Putin and began the arrangements for a meeting at a location to be determined between President Putin and President Zelensky. After that meeting takes place, we will have a trilat, which would be the two presidents plus myself." Now, Ambassador Sands, starting with you, what is your reaction to this announcement?
Well, Tiffany, thanks for having me to talk about this unbelievable occasion. It would not have happened if not for President Trump being in the White House. He's the only world leader. I mean, he's the only person in the world that could have convened a meeting with Putin. No one else did. So if they could have, they would have. And now to have Zelensky and some of the leadership from Europe, who I assume are going to give some kind of security guarantees for Ukraine, that's a wonderful step. Now we know that President Trump's team is setting up a meeting between Vladimir Zelensky and Vladimir Putin, and the two presidents will meet, and then they'll have a trilat with President Trump there. And I think we're going to have Christmas without war in Ukraine. I think they will have to compromise on both sides. But if Ukraine can largely keep their country intact while getting peace and ending the war, that's a huge win for the world and for the people of Ukraine and for the young men in Russia that have been dying. I think they've lost about 1 million men. So it's a tragedy. But President Trump's leadership led to this. He leads with peace through strength. He's the peace president. He's already done peace deal after peace deal, the latest being Armenia and Azerbaijan. So I'm really excited, Tiffany. Today is a great day.
A lot to unpack here for sure, but first, Bart, your reaction to this latest announcement.
I agree. And I think one of the most significant developments is that President Trump said that there will be some American participation in some form of security guarantee for Ukraine. The European leaders needed that. You know, the real loser in this whole process has been the EU. The EU tried to present itself as a sharp power, a hard-edged power, and they were designed to be a common market, and they need to go back to being a common market. They've shown that they could do nothing toward President Putin. They could not reason with him. They could not threaten him. They could not coerce him into coming to make peace. They've also shown that when it looked like President Trump was achieving a breakthrough, they all rushed head over heels to the White House to try to coordinate with him. And they needed President Trump to come and be the leader and to come out and say, yes, we're going to do this, and we're going to have a meeting, and we will have a trilateral meeting. No representative of the EU there, just America, Russia, and Ukraine.
And in terms of ending this conflict, Ambassador, following the Budapest Memorandum in 1994, when Ukraine agreed to give up nuclear weapons, Russia's annexation of Crimea in 2014 was widely seen as a breach of that. Given that, what kind of security guarantees does Ukraine need this time around?
Well, if that happened under a weak U.S. President Barack Obama, and we know Vladimir Putin would not have invaded Ukraine if President Trump or a strong U.S. president had been in office. But feckless leadership leads to terrible outcomes in the world. I will say, regarding security guarantees, this is Europe's war. Europe should give the guarantees. I know that President Trump floated the idea of an Article 5 type security guarantee, and Vladimir Putin has said no. Now, it's going to be a negotiation. Both sides will have to compromise. But the fact is, President Trump was elected by his voters to keep us out of foreign wars. We do not want American boots on the ground in Europe, in Ukraine, and we don't want to spend our treasure, our capital, in building up Ukraine or defending Ukraine. This is Europe's problem. They caused it. They were buying the Russian gas, and they have feckless leadership. They did nothing to stop this invasion. So what I would say is the supporters of President Trump do not support, as far as I understand, American boots on the ground or American treasure being bled out in Ukraine, where this has been a long time place of conflict. We actually want to build up America and make America great again. Let Russia make Russia great again by doing trade deals as they get to peace, and let the Europeans rebuild Ukraine.
And expanding on that, Bart, what is Europe's role here?
Europe has to be the front line of defense. Carla is right when she says that we don't want American boots on the ground. Europe also has to stop buying Russian oil and gas. And I suspect that that is part of the security guarantee, that the American participation that President Trump is referring to. I agree with her. He probably does not have any intention of supplying troops or supplying even air power and things like that. I think that his preferred method is economic, and I think that he will force the European leaders to stop paying the very person that they say they're afraid of. It's absolutely ridiculous to have them buying Russian oil and gas, feeding the war machine that has kept this war going, that has made it persist all these years. If they had stopped buying Russian energy, the war would have ended 2 years ago.
And Ambassador, digging into this a bit, though, what would having American boots on the ground in Ukraine as a deterrent mean for U.S. foreign policy?
Well, I don't think that the American voters will be willing to have American boots on the ground in Ukraine. So I think it's a non-starter, personally. But I do believe that President Trump, when he spoke in Saudi Arabia last May, he rolled out a new idea of shared security through prosperity and trade. In other words, countries that do a lot of trade and become rich together are unlikely to invade each other and to go to war with each other. And so as he talks to Russia, you could see that a lot of Russian businessmen showed up there in Alaska. Their economy, although it's on a wartime footing, isn't healthy. They need to diversify. They need global trade. They've been a pariah country now since the invasion. They have limited trade because so many countries have sanctions on Russia. And so the idea that they could sell their gas and oil on an open market rather than on the cheap to China and India, that they could have more robust trade and diversify their economy in a more free market setting. That's really very interesting, I think, to the Russian businessmen. And it will be good for the world if they come out of this wartime economy and re-enter the community of nations. And I think that's what President Trump is working to do as hard and as fast as he can.
I do want to get to China, but very quickly, Bart, what would be the political implications of having, U.S. boots on the ground in Ukraine, especially in the next midterms?
Oh, it would be disastrous politically. It's not going to happen. Period. It's not going to happen.
Well, on that note, let's go back to Ambassador. What has been China's role here? Often people point to the no limits partnership between Russia and Ukraine, Russia and China, that is. How is China watching the Ukraine war?
Yeah, Tiffany, this war would end tomorrow if China wasn't helping to finance it and to, give Russia all kinds of help in this war, including getting North Korean soldiers down there. There's more than 20,000 North Korean soldiers fighting in this war because Russia, having trouble getting enough soldiers. They go into that meat grinder and then they're gone. It's been disastrous for Russia, although they are still, they have more munitions that they're creating. Every month, they're creating more munitions than the EU and the US combined. So Russia is truly on a wartime footing, and it's exciting to think about them transitioning to something new. And it looks like it's cost them about 1 million men, but in 2014, they had 7% of Ukraine. Today, they have 19%, more or less. So they haven't made that much of a gain. And if Ukraine can walk away with 80% of their territory intact after being attacked by a really brutal war machine, Russian troops are unbelievable. that is a win. It's a win for Ukraine and a win for Europe.
And Bart, looking ahead a little bit here, how could a peace deal change the no limits partnership between Russia and China and the U.S.-China relationship?
I think a peace deal will pull Russia away from China. That's been President Trump's aim from the very beginning of his first administration, and I think he's about to achieve it. As Russia makes peace, Ukraine will have to face elections of some sort. President Zelensky is not synonymous with Ukraine. There are other candidates who could go and deliver a knockout blow to Ukraine's enemies. China is watching all of this, and China sees that America is once again the indispensable nation because we have an indispensable president in the White House. You look at that summit between Putin and Trump in Alaska. Trump summoned Putin to Alaska. He invited him. Putin came, and if you were watching the ceremony, you saw when the B-2 bomber flew over with its escorts, you saw Putin flinch. He was not expecting it, and the noise made him flinch. And Trump was reminding him that the last time he sent those planes anywhere, they were bombing the nuclear facilities in Tehran. It was a not so subtle reminder of American might and American capability and American restraint. He's telling China, listen, I could send these, if you thought about invading Taiwan, I could send these to participate. If you exceeded your bounds, I could do anything I wanted, and we have the power, and you don't have the power to stop us. Now, I am a benign person, and I am president of a benign country, and I don't want to do any of those things, but he reminded China that he can if they push him or if they exceed the limits that the world is putting on them.
And Ambassador, very quickly, what are you watching for in the coming days and weeks in terms of ending this conflict?
Well, the thing I'm most excited about is the speed that this is happening. President Trump is seizing and using momentum to get to success. So I'm watching that really very intently. You saw how fast he convened these EU leaders who I actually think tried to scuttle the summit in Alaska. They said terrible things, not understanding, I think, without wisdom, that you have to be able to have a good relationship with other world leaders. You don't want to make them your enemy. You can't sit down at a table and negotiate with an enemy. It just doesn't work. Everyone is angry. You have to make relationships. And so maybe they'll learn from President Trump. I hope so. There's a lot that they could follow in his leadership, whether it's being strong on China or whether it is increasing trade and, rejecting net zero, but actually using their own domestic energy to build their countries and reindustrialize like President Trump has us on track to do. So I'm cautiously optimistic that we will get to a good place with our European allies because they're important trading partners. This is the most important relationship we have. And what an exciting thing to bring Russia back into the community of nations. And President Trump is the one president that can do it.
Ambassador Carla Sands, Bart Marcois, as always, thank you both so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thanks, Tiff.